Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Mrinmoy Pramanik. I teach comparative Indian language and literature at the University of Calcutta. Today we will discuss early translation in Indian languages. It's a module from literary translation in India. A representative text of ancient and medieval Indian culture, religion and philosophy have been composed in Sanskrit and Pali languages mainly. Translation of those texts into Bhasha has been started since the medieval period, and with this translation the Bhasha or modern Indian languages have been emerged in India. There were different classes, caste and religious identities played role into such translations. The awakening among the masses, people's resistance against the ruling class, resistance against Brahmanism and caste hierarchy necessarily called for translation to be happened. Moreover, translation was one of the powerful or only one prominent long-lasting tool for the rulers to know their ruling subjects and to send their knowledge among the public life of the ruled. Sanskrit, as the language of the elites, Brahmins, philosophers, poets, rhetoricians, was appeared as only the way to be better human being for the masses who did not have access to the Sanskrit directly. The treasure of Sanskrit knowledge, poetry, moral teachings, aesthetics and religion was essentially to achieve to the common who did not speak Sanskrit or write Sanskrit. In other side, Pali appeared as a language for new religious identity and knowledge. The gradual expansion of Buddhism expanded the use of Pali language too. Translation into or from Pali rapidly grew since 100th century. The old institution of knowledge like Nalanda Vishwavidyalaya, which was one of the premier institutions to promote Buddhist knowledge and culture, engaged itself with the exchange of knowledge among different scholars. Such activities like intellectual exchange, messengers sent by King Ashoka for spreading Buddhism in Sri Lanka, translated from or to Pali, or prepare the ground for exchanging knowledge through translation. Later Bhakti movement in different parts of India took sources of knowledge from Sanskrit and Pali both to reach to the common people with their easy philosophical interpretation of critical thought on religion and spirituality found in mainly in Sanskrit. With the expansion of Mughal rule, Persian got a significant position as it was the language of the rulers and used as official language in the Mughal Empire. Since this linguistic paradigm shift with the changes of state power, the concentration of translation also shifted towards Bhasha. One side there was already established tradition of translation from Sanskrit, and in other side new trend of translation from Persian to Bhasha also was established. In this module, we will mainly discuss the translation and the role of it in formation of Bhasha. The early translation in India is traced here from the era of formation of Bhasha culture. Sanskrit, Pali and Prakrit texts have been translating in the different periods in Indian Bhasha as well as in English after English is introduced in India for various reasons. Medieval Indian literature observed a deliberate attempt of Bhasha culture to translate Sanskrit, as it determined to resist against the caste hegemony and break the confinement of Hindu knowledge from the restricted zone of Brahmins and other elites. Sanskrit, Pali and Prakrit has primary responsibility to bring the knowledge sphere in medieval India in different Bhasha traditions. In the colonial time, the British encounter observed Sanskrit especially as the key for accessing the Indian knowledge to rule better. Now, let us talk about the translation of Sanskrit literature, philosophy, and other texts into Bhasha. First, let us begin with a quotation which was very popular, and the quotation is in Sanskrit, and it was very popular in medieval India. That Astadasha Puranani Ramasya Charitani cha Bhashaya Manava Srutva Raurabh Narakang Brajet, which means 18 Puranas, story of the Rama, listening in Bhasha led towards Raurabh, or the worst hell. The Brahmins used their knowledge of Sanskrit as an irreducible form of power, and translation was not encouraged, since it would have diluted the role the text could have played as a part of such an officially sponsored ideology. So, from this statement, we can understand that Sanskrit was completely confined among the Sanskrit and other elites, or the people who had power to rule over others. Despite the above quoted warning not to read Sanskrit text in Bhasha, and if anyone did so, the person would go to the worst kind of hell called Raurabha. Yet many poets wrote or translated in Bhasha but did not claim the language to be Bengali or Marathi or Malayalam or Tamil, but to be Deshi Bhasha or Loka Bhasha or Laukik Bhasha or Manava Bhasha. This revolt against the warning favoring the hegemony of Sanskrit language over other languages was actually a revolt against caste hegemony over knowledge, and prepared the ground for the development of Bhasha. The growth and development of translation in this era was first for Desh and then for Loka, or common people, and knowledge written in Deva Bhasha, or language of the gods, was translated and stolen from heaven for Desh or Loka. The translation practice of this era leads to the localization of myth and the localization of knowledge, which were confined within a particular class for the centuries. Such translation was indeed meant for Desh and Loka by feeding into it the knowledge of Deva Loka, Deva Bhasha, and Deva Sahitya. So the text like Ramayana, Mahabharata, classical Sanskrit plays, the Puranas, the Shastras, the Vedas were started to be translated into different Indian Bhasha. Complication surfaces when Maladhar Boshu is congratulated by the Sultan of translating Bhagavata into Bangla in 1473 or 1480 according to historian Sukumar Sen, and the chief minister of Hossein Shah, Sanatan of Ramkeli village of Gaur, used to discuss Bhagavata at the end of 15th century. The celebrity status of Maladhar Basu and Sanatan's status as discussant of the Bhagavata shows the public life of this text and its translation, which was well received by the people. This helped Bangla language to get its shape. I took this example to show to discuss the medieval translation scenario, that how the people, the scholars who wanted to translate or practice literature into Bhasha got their power with the power shift of the state. With the beginning of the Muslim rule or Islamic rule in different parts of India, the Bhasha, the power of Bhasha actually emerged, and through this Islamic rule, the people who wanted to practice literature in Bhasha, they got the courage to translate Sanskrit literature, Purana and Vedanta, Upanishada into different Bhasha language. Historian Sukumar Sen proposed Madhav Kandali as the first translator of the Ramayana into Assamese, and he situated him in the 15th century. Sen argues Krittivasha's Ramayana is influenced by the Bhakti Rasa, which was enhanced by the powerful influence of Chaitanya Dev. Madhav Kandali's Bhakti Rasa was Vishnu Bhakti Rasa. He finds remarkable difference between the translation of the Ramayana and Mahabharata in Bangla. Sen holds that while Ramayana was translated in Panchali style, meant mainly for singing, Mahabharata, although claimed as Panchali, was for reading. Since the Ramayana translation became part of Hindu ritual and performed in formal programs, it seems the translator of the Ramayana were the Brahmins and the translators of the Mahabharata were other upper caste, mainly Kayastho. But through this discussion, we can understand that it is not about the literary translation, but the translation of this Sanskrit classical text or epics also happened in performance, through performance. So this different kind of translation we can find in the early translation history in different Bhasha literature. If we see the case of Tamil, and we can find that it is not only the Kamban's translation of the Ramayana, but we can find the existence of Ramayana which is translated in different oral traditions of Tamil Nadu. And those Tamil oral tradition of Ramayana and Mahabharata actually influenced the Southeast Asian Ramayana culture also, as the scholar Velu claimed that Tamil folk Ramayana influenced the Thai Ramayana of the Thailand. Now, in the history of different dynasties and the manners of royal courts, there existed the tradition of reading Mahabharata. The first translation of the Mahabharata into Bangla is Paragali Mahabharata or Pandava Vijay by Kavindra Parameshwar in 1515. Kavindra Parameshwar wrote it on the order of Paragal Khan, a governor of the Sultan Hossein Saha. As this Mahabharata was translated by a Muslim governor's order, there were few remarkable changes from the source text. There were many translations of the Mahabharata story into Bangla, like Ashwamedha Parva, which was written in 1552 to 1553 by Ramachandra Khan, and Ashwamedha Parva by Bijo Raghunath, which was published in 1567. The translation of Purana was supported and promoted by the King Vishwasingh of the royal court of Kamta Kamrup, and the translation happened between 1522 to 1554. This royal court promoted both Sanskrit literature and translation of Purana into Bangla. King Shamar Singh, son of the King Vishwasingh, was the patron of poet Pitambar, who translated Markandeya Purana into Bangla. By the order of Samar Singh, Pitambar also wrote Usha Aniruddher Kahini in 1533 based on the Bhagavata. Besides Vishnu Purana and Nala Damayanti from Mahabharata in 1544. Sukumar Sen mentions that Pitambar was not Brahmin, and since translating, recreating Purana by a non-Brahmin was not within their right, so the poet calls himself a Shishnu or a Shishu or childlike, most probably to avoid the wrath of the Brahmins. Different chapters of the Mahabharata were translated at this royal court by different poets, as Drona Parva by Gopinatha, Birata Parva by Bisharad Chakravarti, and Bana Parva by Bisharad Chakravarti, and Kirata Parva by Govindo Kabishekhar, and Mahabharata in Poyar meter by Brahman Srinath. In his discussion of the development of Bengali language and literature, Sukumar Sen includes the translation of Mahabharata in Assam and Kamrup, arguing that the language in the 16th century was not shaped as distinctly as Bangla or as Assamese. So this translation should be included while tracing the history of Bangla literature and when tracing the history of Assamese literature too. He mentions that the language of these translations was similar to the Uttar Purbi dialect of Bangla language. Now we can beside this Bengali translation of the Ramayana and Mahabharata, Shankar Deva and Madhav Kandali both have immense significance in the history of early translation of this epic literature, epic text into into Indian language like Assamese. Kamban's Ramavataram, written in 12th century, is one of the early translation of the Ramayana into Bhasha. A.K. Ramanujan, in his canonical essay 300 Ramayana, points out this vital factor of difference. A.K. Ramanujan commented, throughout Kamban's poem, Rama is a Tamil hero, a generous giver and a ruthless destroyer of foes, and the Bhakti vision makes the release of Ahalya from her rock-bound scene a paradigm of Rama's incarnatory mission to release all souls from world-bound misery. Written in the early 17th century, Adhyatma Ramayana is the first Malayalam translation of Valmiki's Ramayana, originally titled as Advaita Ramayanam Kilipattu. This adaptation of the epic focuses solely on the spiritual aspects of the storyline. Sarala Das was a prominent Oriya poet from the state of Odisha who was best known for his translation of the Mahabharata into his native language, Oriya. Oriya, written in the 15th century and the first of its kind in the Oriya language. Sarala Das's translation of the epic is known for its various deviations from the original storyline and the innumerable stories which Das himself wrote and incorporated into the translated version. Along with this translation of the Purana and the Mahakavyas, there are immense influence of classical Sanskrit literature, and so many new literary genres are emerged with the influence of classical Sanskrit literature. Kalidas's Meghadutam actually influenced many Indian Bhasha literature, and a new genre called Duta Kavyam emerged in different Indian Bhasha culture. So such kind of generic translation with the influence of Sanskrit literature and the classical Sanskrit texts also we can find in the history of Indian literature as early Indian translation. Another interesting regarding the translation of the Puranas, Bhagavata, Ramayana and Mahabharata is that most translation of these texts derive from multiple sources, or the translators include small pieces, narratives, stories, incidents from different texts into translation. Whatever details are available to the translators are incorporated in the translation and claimed as a version of Ramayana. This process of inclusive translation, which was a popular practice among the translators of the medieval Bengal, perhaps helped to reach the common people. Probably this method appeared to them as easiest and logical way to circulate knowledge of great ideas already found in Sanskrit interwoven with the Desi. Translating Pali and Prakrit text into different Indian Bhasha languages. The Pali language got its importance as a spoken language of the people, of the common mass, and the religious text of Buddhism, religious philosophy of Buddhism was written in this Pali language. So the most significant text among the whole Buddhist literature and philosophy, which was very much popular and was translated in different Indian languages, was Dhammapada. So we can find the importance of Pali literature, spirituality and knowledge text and its influence in translation in different Indian languages, mainly through Dhammapada. though we can find many later adaptation of the Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist literature, Buddhist stories in different modern Indian languages in different ages. Particularly, the stories of Jataka were translated in almost all the Indian languages. Beside the Pali, the translation of Pali, we can find a very popular text written in Prakrit language is Gaha Sattasai, a 700 poems collected by the king of Sadvahana king Hal, and that King Hala collected these stories from the life of the common people, from the folk life, and he made the anthology Gaha Sattasai. And this text Gaha Sattasai immensely translated in different Indian languages. Historian Dinesh Chandra Sen commented in this context of translation of Pali and Prakrit, and regarding the Buddhist existence and Buddhist and Brahminical conflicts, he wrote, "Isolated instances of Buddhist influence were never extinct. Even the Ramayana by Krittivash is not entirely immune from the said influence. The 17th century author of the Ramayana, the Bengali poet Ramananda, was in the habit of spoiling for recognition as an incarnate of Buddha. A person of gold merchant caste, a contemporary of Lord Chaitanya, went so far as to refuse to be a Vaishnava on the plea that to seek bliss when the whole populace is steeped into misery is meaningless. But then this doctrine of misery is native to Buddhism itself." Pali plays a vital role in the cultural history of India. The entire canonical early Buddhist literature is available in Pali language, though the later teachers of Mahayana Buddhism have adopted Sanskrit for their philosophical and logical expositions. Pali remains the actual basis for understanding the Buddhism. Pali, being the very ancient language of India, has occupied the prominent place in the history of Indian Buddhism as well as Indian literature. In the early centuries of the Christian era, Buddhist texts were translated into Chinese and Tibetan innumerously. So, as early translation of Pali literature or Pali philosophy, spirituality and knowledge text, we can find since the beginning of the Christian era in Chinese and Tibetan languages, and later we can find those in different Indian languages too. As I mentioned earlier, that Persian, since the time of Islamic rule or Sultanate rule started in India, Persian got a very significant role as a language of power. And with this language, the Indian people, the existing Indian people, they encountered with a new culture, new literature, new genres, and different kind of new artistic forms. As Persian was the language of the ruler, there was a very interwoven kind of connection between Persian and Indian Bhasha, even with the Persian and Sanskrit. So both way translation happened in the early and medieval Indian Bhasha culture. The rise of Persian as a court language offers interesting parallels for contemporaneous shifts in linguistics usage in South Asia, where around the beginning of the second millennium CE, vernacular literary codes and forms began to replace the more translocal Sanskritic forms, which South Asian elites had favored from the first few centuries of the Christian era. It is commented by Flood. Finbury Flood rightly pointed out the significance of the Persian in social and cultural life being a court language. This comment is equally true for different Bhasha languages of different parts of India, not only generally in South Asia. The translations from Persian and Persian as a language of power had strengthened Islamic identity and offered people cultural prestige. In this context, Islamic rule and Persian as court language carries significance in the history of different Bhasha literature. Through their translation, Islamic literature and the religious and philosophical ideas reached the common Muslim people. Translation from Sanskrit to Persian and Persian to vernacular was also popular and patronized during Mughal era. Especially in the 16th century, during Akbar's time, Akbar employed translators to translate the Mahabharata into Persian. Several texts had also been translated from Persian into Bangla and into other languages. Perhaps the most popular was the story of Laila Majnu, which was rendered in different Indian languages. Another story of Yusuf Zulaikha was translated by Shah Muhammad Sagir and was claimed to have been translated in the 14th century in Bengali language even before the Sri Krishna Kirtana, which is considered as the first literary text, written text in medieval Bengali literature. Besides the translation of Hindu literatures, the trend of translating Hindi and Persian texts were established by the Muslim poets of medieval India and thereby contributed different streams of translation in different Indian languages. Famous poet Alaul, whose Padmavati became the paradigmatic text for the Muslim society in Bengal, translated many other texts from Hindi and Persian like Tofar, Chaiful Mulk Badi Uzmal, Iskandar Nama and Sekandar Nama into Bengali in medieval period. The first romantic love narrative was the contribution of Daulat Qazi, who translated Sadhan's Mainasat as Sati Maina in 17th century. Poet Navadash's Vaktamal was by Navadash's Vaktamal written by poet Krishnadas Babaji or Laldasji in 27 volumes, and that text also was translated in different Indian languages along with Bengali. Poets Sabirid Khan and Muhammad Khan wrote stories of Hanifa and Kairapari, folktales from Chattagram. Muhammad Khan's book was titled Hanifar Ladai. These were translation of folk narratives into different Puthi in Persian languages in 17th century. So we can see that there were the translation, the ways, the comfortable ways of translation among different Indian languages. Translation from Persian to Sanskrit, from Sanskrit to Persian, translation from Persian to different Bhasha languages, and from different Bhasha language into Persian. So in this way, translation in medieval India or the instances of early Indian translation play a great role as secular space of knowledge exchanging. As I mentioned earlier that Akbar patronized a court or a bureau of translating literature from Sanskrit into Persian. He set up a Maktab Khana or translation bureau, and from that translation bureau they not only translated the Mahabharata but they translated Yoga Vasishta and Harivamsam, the Srimad Bhagavad, the Singhashan Battisi, the Ramayana, and many works of Indian music and culture into Persian. Badauni translated the Ramayana into Persian in 4 years with much reluctance, but when the translation was complete, it was good that Akbar gave him again against his will another task of the complete Persian translation of the Atharva Veda. After Akbar, his great-grandson Dara Shikoh continued this tradition of translating Hindu works into Persian. Dara Shikoh got 50 Upanishads entitled Sir-e-Akbar, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Yoga Vasishta Ramayana translated into Persian with the help of a team of translators. Aditya Vehel notes that it is Sir-e-Akbar that became the basis of Europe's idealist philosophers discover of the East after Anquetil Duperron translated it into Latin in 1801. Baba Farid recommended the use of Punjabi for religious writings. Sheikh Hamiduddin, before him, wrote in Hindwai. His verses are the best example of early Hindwai translation of Persian mystical poetry. Now, let us talk about translation between Bhasha. As we already mentioned that the translation culture of early India or medieval India was not only a monolithic structure or one-way traffic, but there was connection between Sanskrit, there was culture of translation between Sanskrit to Bhasha, from Sanskrit to Persian, from Persian to Bhasha, and from Bhasha to Bhasha. If we take few examples, we can understand it. There is a text written in medieval period which is very much influenced by Sufism, that is Malik Muhammad Jaisi's Padumabad, which was written in early Hindi, translated by Bengali poet Sayyid Alaul as Padmavati. Not only this example, but we can take example of Sati Maina, which was translation of Sadhan's Mainasat and Mrigabat, and this was translated by Daulat Kaji into Bengali. So from these examples, we can understand the translation, a comfortable way of translation between the old Hindi and old Bengali was there. Scholar of Indian literature K. Sachidanandan commented that our first writers too are translators. Indian literature is founded on the free translations and adaptation of epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata. Up to the 19th century, our literature consisted only of translations, adaptations, interpretations, and retellings. Translations of literary works as well as knowledge text, discourses on medicine, astronomy, metallurgy, travel, shipbuilding, architecture, philosophy, religion, and poetics from Sanskrit, Pali, Prakrit, Persian, and Arabic had kept our cultural scene vibrant and enriched our awareness of the world for long. Most of our ancient writers were multilingual. Kalidas's Shakuntala has Sanskrit and Prakrit language. Poets like Vidyapati, Kabir, Mirabai, Guru Nanak, Namdev, and other each composed their songs and poems in more than one languages. So there was existence of instant translating in a single text, in the creation of single text, and that translation was definitely from Bhasha to Bhasha. Now let us talk about one of the most significant phenomena, a revolutionary phenomena, which shaped not only the themes or structure of Indian literature, but the social psyche of the people, social psyche, religious psyche of the people of India, that is Bhakti movement. Bhakti movement also has its immense role to play in medieval Indian translation. Bhakti movement and Bhasha culture synthesized people's belief and people's literature, which was there in oral tradition and in local language, with the philosophical and religious thoughts which were found in scriptures and classical text. Medieval translation always carried the traces of raw vernacular vocabulary, riddles, secret codes, and non-rational images, which shows the deep affinity between the translation and social life, which further ensures the translation reached its target audience. The texts which were translated during medieval period not only tried to bring knowledge from Sanskrit and later from the Persian text, but also tried to express spirituality in people's language. According to Schelling, Bhakti poetry occurs at the confluence of Sanskrit with India's vernacular traditions. Bhakti and the poems that convey its passions are, in A.K. Ramanujan's words, deliberately anti-tradition. The motivation for the development of Bhasha was to oppose a religious hierarchy and politics of knowledge, restriction within certain caste and class. It also sought to satisfy people's desire for spirituality. Bhakti Bhava of the creative poet translators mind for the selection, translation and circulation of particular text. Krittivas's popularity and wide circulation of his manuscript was due to his Bhakti Bhava towards Vaishnavism and his devotion in that culture. Alaul's Padmavati was very much influenced by his knowledge and belief on Sufism, which also made this translated text acceptable to the Bengali community, most especially among the Muslims of Bengal. Scaling adapts Dilip Chitra's term to describe the literary productions of Bhakti movement as orature. Scaling also comments that Bhakti is oral poetry, orature not literature, enunciated by the poet and written onto the page only later, often centuries later. In this sense, its natural habitat has always been performance. Bhakti was not only expressed in the performative or the oral tradition, but was in written forms also. It exists in different Indian cultures. It was a happy marriage between written culture and oral tradition, as local was reflected of the manuscripts which were adapted by the oral performer of religious text in Bhasha language, in Bhasha literature, in Bhasha culture. Bhakti and Bhasha were determining factors for the birth of medieval Indian translation and thus Indian literature too. Scaling adds, Bhakti poetry occurs at the confluence of Sanskrit with India's vernacular traditions. But the influences of Bhakti was not only limited within the culture of Sanskrit, the influence of Sufism led the translation of Alaul's Padmavati. Bhakti was involved with the making of Bhasha. Krishna Bhakti of Bhagavata became Vaishnava Krishna Bhakti in translation in the post-Chaitanya era. Although translations of into Bengali had begun earlier to Chaitanya, such translations increased in number and value in post-Chaitanya era. The Vaishnavite philosophies and other religious theories were also translated into different Indian languages, as the Sanskrit text from Vrindavan for the Vaishnava leaders in Navadvip or any other Vaishnavite places of different parts of India, as well as the followers in rest of the part of the India. Bhagavata interpretation, that Nataka, Vaishnava Sriti, Kavya, Alamka Shastra by the Vaishnavite scholar like Sanatan Goswami, Rup Goswami, Jeev Goswami, Gopal Bhatta, Raghunath Das were translated in huge number through 17th and 18th century. But these translators, I took few examples of translators from the Gaudu and the Navadvip area of Bengal. But such kind of translation also happened in the south, different places of South India also, mainly by the Alawars and Nayanmars. All these religious sect groups also participated in such kind of translation. So the historical reality of ancient and medieval translation or the early translation of India is not any isolated phenomena of any particular part of India, but equally such kind of cultural expansion we can find in different Indian Bhasha culture. I took here examples from a particular language, more specifically, just to put the examples to establish the arguments. For further reading, for detailed reading on this subject, and for getting more examples from different Indian Bhasha culture and different Indian languages, you can consult the e-text provided here. Thank you.